Great to see you, Rishad. Welcome to the Future of Identity.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, as we've discussed, one of the reasons I wanted you to be part of this event was we wanted to have a human dimension to the event. That's not to say our other speakers aren't human, but we wanted to talk about the human dimension to the topic of data. And you, of course, not only are you something of an industry legend during your time at Publicis, but you also wrote a book which was very timely and very relevant to this event, Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. Could you tell us a little bit about the book and why you wrote it?
Absolutely. Overall, the book has been written to help people see, think, and feel differently about how to grow themselves, their teams, and their business. And the key is think differently by trying to integrate what I call the story and the spreadsheet. And the reason I wrote it is our industry and all industries. So this book is not necessarily just an advertising and marketing book, but it's broader. It's for all of business and maybe even for society. Was increasingly inclined and tending towards thinking that data was the Holy Grail and the solution lay in data. And as someone who has a major in mathematics, an MBA in finance, and is somewhat aware of data for the last 2.5 decades, I believe that while data was important and is important, it alone doesn't solve for much. That we have too much math, but too little meaning. So how do you combine the spreadsheet with the story? And the book basically shows how individuals and businesses that thrive in any context, whether where the future is going, running a meeting, running a business, unify, balance, and integrate the story and the spreadsheet. And the story is people, culture, and meaning.
So you've been working in digital advertising since its inception. And do you think that during that time, even since digital advertising started, it has gone through enormous change? Do you think that the automation and the layering over of data, has it improved advertising for the better, do you think?
I would say it has improved the ability to do two things with advertising for the better. The first is it has made it easier to a certain extent, personalize at scale. The ability to basically identify and find different segments and continuously iterate and operate and do so with minimal friction is one, I would say, step forward that it has basically done. And the second, as the world has become more broadband driven, the ability to replace a banner ad with an interaction, whether it be a video interaction or a app or a e-commerce action. Those two have been, pretty significant achievements. Um, the areas which those achievements have brought in certain disadvantages and worries are one, as the world has become more digital, we have started to find that what was set up as an advertising operating system, a way to micro target people with messages that got them to buy products, has now become a society operating system that bad characters use to either suppress the vote or get people to vote the wrong way or to hate each other. And in effect, uh, our industry has actually become one where a brand can both build itself, but a brand can be particularly hurt.
Mm. And which campaigns over the years, are there any that come to mind that were, exceptionally successful? And, to what extent was the success of those campaigns, of that campaign, determined by the use of data?
So, in the years that I've been working in the industry, um, the first big campaigns that we actually did online were on America Online. And this was in about 1996, 1997, 95. And there were two things that we basically did. We um, put a McDonald's program called McMoms It was a direct marketing program to mothers, and we moved it onto America Online. And in effect, what we managed to do was eliminate a lot of costs of mailing and identifying people. And there, the data was showing the client that you could reach the same people at a lower cost because you no longer had to post things. But the campaign that really was, I think, also made AOL in many ways was a campaign we did for a brand that no longer exists. It was General Motors Oldsmobile brand. And the General Motors Oldsmobile brand was trying to basically um, revive itself. And one of the strategies we suggested was to try to associate with next generation media. So we did stuff with Wired.com and we did stuff with AOL. The insight there were two insights that were particularly important, and neither of those were actually data the way you look at it. So I always remind people that data can help, but it may not necessarily be the data of the campaign. It may be data of something else. And here were the two pieces of data that were actually very influential. The first was I asked a question to America Online, which seems arcane today, but the question I asked was, what is prime time on America Online? And they said, what are you talking about? I said, in television, sometime between like 7 and 9 p.m. or 7 and 10 p.m. in the evening is when we have the largest audiences. And that's particularly true like on a Sunday night. What for you is prime time? And they basically said it's 9 p.m. Eastern. So I said, all right, what we would like to do is we would like to basically buy your opening homepage from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. every day for the next year for Oldsmobile. And then to make things interesting, I also asked, what do people most like doing? And they said what they most like doing is chatting. Remember, this was when it was still 56K, 28K, so chatting. So we said, all right, we will put a program together. Who do they chat with? Well, they chat with each other. So I said, fine. We partnered with a company called International Creative Management, ICM, and we actually created the Oldsmobile Celebrity Circle. It was a 1 hour chat with a celebrity. The first celebrity we had was, I think it was Samuel Jackson, because Pulp Fiction had just come out, right? And so to a great extent, you could chat between 8 and 9 o'clock, and everybody who got to AOL saw this little banner which says America Online presents Oldsmobile Celebrity Circle. Today, Samuel Jackson. Tomorrow, someone else. And the big insights were those two. Chat was the most useful thing, and that their prime time was 9 to 10. This was so valuable, and we paid less than $1 million for the year. And we negotiated for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, they offered that back to us for $25 to $30 million, and we said no, thank you.
Very nice piece of deal making. I remember that being in the early days of Twitter, which was probably quite a long time after you ran that campaign. But one of the most loved features was the sense of celebrities being accessible. So
yes,
you were ahead of
yes, it's one of those. And so I keep reminding people that all through, we sometimes measure the wrong thing and we pay attention to the wrong thing. And today, the biggest challenge we have is we've got so much data that we sometimes don't know what to look at or what it's telling us. So I paraphrase Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the poet, and he basically has this line in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which says, water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink, because he's stuck in an ocean, so there's salt water. So I basically say today, most of the people who I'm speaking with, who are obviously very good at what they do, this is the challenge they face. Data, data everywhere. So much data, I will sink. Data, data everywhere. Which is the data that will help me think?
Very true. It's a great adaptation. So in the book, you say that data is a bit like electricity, which I thought was quite an interesting comparison, because it's often spoken about today as if it's a very much a key differentiator for any business, and a lot of this event will be about first-party data. Could you explain a bit more about why you sort of see it as being similar to electricity?
So data is like electricity in that it does two things that are very important. The first is without electricity, most companies cannot operate. So it is essential to operation. So if anyone basically says data is not important to their business, I say, I'm not sure that's true. Data is important. It may be you don't have the right data, but it is important. The second, electricity does something else, which is it illuminates. It shows you the way ahead. It basically throws light on things. So data is for those two reasons. It's essential for a business and it throws light for things. However, today, how many companies differentiate themselves on how they use electricity? Very few. So I remind most marketers and most businesses that while data is essential and data illuminates, it is very unlikely that your data will help you actually differentiate.
Yeah.
Not having it will be a competitive disadvantage. But everyone has moved, and it is a competitive advantage if half your competitors are in the steam age and you happen to be in the electric age. But most competitors have caught up. Everybody basically talks about it. Everybody has data scientists. And outside of a handful of companies, maybe some of the big banks, obviously some of the big platforms, it's very hard to basically think that data is the savior. And as a result, believing that that's the answer, it isn't. What is the answer is the people who work with the data, who draw out the insights, who draw out the knowledge, who draw out the wisdom, and who draw out the meaning. And therefore, I believe it's not just the data, but the culture of the place, the data scientists, making sure that your data scientists, the best data scientists, are not just data geeks. The best data scientists are people who are very curious, people who constantly question the status quo, and surprisingly, people who can communicate. And I would always basically say to any marketer, I want to see the data scientist that did this work. I don't want you to just present the work because I want to talk to her or him because they have many more skills and you are reducing them to just data skills. And I don't think many people, including in this conference, want to be reduced to one thing because if you are reduced to just numbers, you're going to be automated away tomorrow.
It's one of the examples you gave when we spoke before, what related to how different sort of countries have dealt with coronavirus. Could you maybe talk a bit about that?
Absolutely. So this idea of that it's data plus people is by June or July of 2020, almost everybody in the world knew probably whatever at that time was the state of the art information about COVID, how it spread, what you needed to do, all those kinds of things. So the data was the same, available to everybody in the world. How come different people applied it and the results were so very different? How is it that the United States, the United Kingdom, and Brazil, which basically looked at the same data and read it one way, on the other hand, Vietnam, Germany, New Zealand, Taiwan read it another way and saw it completely differently? And that was basically because one group decided to believe in science, one group had leaders and governments that were trusted, one group had experience in the past because of SARS or MERS or other things, and the other group basically saw it as I can manipulate this to tell my story, but here's the problem. Science doesn't care about your story. Gravity doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. Jump out of the window, you are going to die. Thank you very much.
The industry for many years has been chasing a holy grail. I think it's there was I think the early promise of programmatic advertising was that would be right ad, right time. You'd be walking past a coffee shop when you wanted a coffee, and you would get a notification. You would joyfully go in and buy a coffee. You know, that was the initial dream, and I think we've sort of gone beyond that. But you know, I think the vision was that every ad would be correctly targeted to the right user, right time, right place, and that the attribution part would all fall into place after the sale. Do you think that's ever going to be possible or even desirable?
I don't think it's going to be as possible broadly as people expect. It might be possible, for a particular campaign or a particular platform on a particular day, but it's not going to be available it's not going to be broadly. Uh, and as I've already said, one of the benefits is we can do that better today than we did before, but I don't think we'll ever reach the Holy Grail. And there are three big reasons we won't reach the Holy Grail. The first is the Holy Grail right now is focused on the plumbing and it's forgetting the poetry. So I remind people that if you find the right person at exactly the right time and you then provide them with the wrong interaction, it's worse than providing the wrong interaction to someone you don't target, because you've got out of your way to find me in the right mood state, in the right thing, and then you can basically say exactly the wrong thing. And we've seen this in our own personal relationships when you get everything right in atmosphere and mood, and then you say exactly the wrong thing. It backfires on you. So we don't focus enough on the poetry versus the plumbing. That's number one. The second is I believe that individuals, every one of us, do not like eventually being put in a box. We sometimes, first of all, I don't think individuals can be put in a box. I believe that a person in two different moods is more different than two different people. It is only scientists and people who have not scientists have actually great imagination. It's people who don't have imagination, right? Who believe that a human being can basically be defined by a bunch of numbers and behaviors and purchase habits. Not necessarily true. We surprise often, right? And we also sometimes do things in social settings we would not do when we are solitary. So the other one is don't try to pin down a human. So one, it's hard to pin down a human. The second one, obviously, is the poetry is sometimes hard to pin down. And the third is we are not logical. People choose with their hearts and they use numbers to justify what they just did. So when anyone basically tells me, I happen to be a data driven person and I can eventually find the right person to do the right thing. So I said, okay, that's great. Tell me the last 10 decisions you've made and let's discuss how much of those were data driven. And if it's a parent, I ask them, explain to me what the ROI on a child is. It's negative as measured by data, right? It's completely negative. You pay a whole bunch of money, you get a whole bunch of grief. What's the whole thing? That's number one. Tell me what car do you drive? Do you drive a car? Cool. Do you drive anything besides a Toyota Camry? Yes. Okay. Why are you driving this expensive car? There's no logical reason. There's no mathematical reason. It's not in any way better, or definitely not worth 50% more for 10% more benefits. Well, you buy it because of status, you buy it because of design, you buy it because of feel. How do you measure that? And so my whole stuff is, and by the way, marketing at its heart is about not utility and function. It's basically about provenance. It's about design. It's about storytelling. It's about culture. So, in effect, anyone who basically is besotted by data is A, not being true to humanity, B, is going to be replaced by a machine, and C, doesn't understand marketing.
That's yeah. Sorry, sponsors. Yeah. So one final question. What's your feeling about this state of the agency model today? I think people have been quite bearish on the agencies for a while, and my own personal feeling is that mood might be starting to change. Do you feel that the large agency holding group model has a future and that they're heading in the right direction?
I do. So I've been in the business, or I was in the business, and now I'm, a starving author running around, but I was in the business, although I still continue to do stuff for my own place of work, um, for 38 years. Sometime in the mid 1990s, there was a Wired magazine cover, which had the Pillsbury Doughboy blindfolded with 3, 4 Mad Men type of people. And the uh, headline was advertising is dead. That particular issue, which I carried with me, and then somewhere along I lost. Okay. I used to put that out because Wired, the magazine, became a small, shrinking part of itself. almost all the technology companies that were advertised in that particular magazine went out of business. And the advertising business doubled and tripled every decade after that. And I remind people that the advertising industry is not like a dinosaur. We are cockroaches, right? Nobody likes us. Everybody looks down at us, but we scurry around, we hide out in the corners, we figure out where the next generation of food is, and we change. And we outlive and outlast everybody. So I believe that we have gone through and we are in the process as an entire industry of a massive transformation that, depending on the holding company or the young company or the new type of company, is going to basically get to a renaissance that nobody sees how big it is. And here's why. Reason number one is marketing is going to be more powerful in the future than ever before, because marketing is about understanding and enabling customer requirements. And no customer or consumer or person is more empowered today than ever before because of modern technology, search, social, mobile, voice, etc. Number one. Most other parts of a corporation have become commoditized, right? The finance world is actually not differentiated. The reality of it is, and I've looked at it, ETFs beat most companies, right? There isn't really any benefit outside of a tax and a club and a cult that Goldman Sachs has over anybody else. And increasingly, people are beginning to realize that these numerical things can be machined much faster. Accounting, logistics, distribution. The one thing that actually includes something that cannot be pinned down and has highly dependent on humanity, change, and innovation is marketing. So it's going to be the one, oddly, that's going to be least automated, even though we're automating it in every particular function. And as a result, that's one benefit. The second benefit is this. The competitive landscape is changing. I've recently written, I write this new free newsletter at rishad.substack.com, and I recently wrote a piece called Ruptures in the Mediascape, right? Which is very popular. I wrote it about 3 weeks ago, and I just before this, I looked, it's now got 35,000 readers, which is pretty interesting. And in it, I basically say, okay, here's everything about the media landscape that's changing that none of us are paying attention to. For instance, we believe that there was a duopoly. I never called it a duopoly. I called it two monopolies. There was a monopoly of search, and there was a monopoly. There were actually three monopolies: a monopoly of search, a monopoly of social, which is sort of communication, and a monopoly of transaction: Amazon, Facebook, and Google. But now I don't think search and social and all these things are separate. I think they've all merged into one another. As you can see in China with WhatsApp and everything else, or with WeChat and everything else. And so we've now moved to a place of mongrels, of which there are at least 7 mongrels in the United States, right? So Snap is a mongrel, Twitter is a mongrel, TikTok is a mongrel. They're very different. The second is you basically have gone to a colonization of the ears versus the colonization of the eyes. Think of all the innovations happening, not just with headphones or what's going on in cars, but everything from Spotify to podcasts to Clubhouse, right? To voice as an interface. That's the second, key thing. So now you're beginning to have fragmentation, different companies, different ways of connecting. It's impossible for a marketer to insource that. It's not that insource won't happen, but it's impossible. The world is changing so fast. Eventually, to do that at scale with the right people, a company won't be manufacturing soap. They'll become an agency, and someone will ask them, what the hell are you doing? Right? And the third thing, which is really, really important, is there was a lack of trust with the agencies, which is slowly coming back. But now there isn't that much faith in the platforms, because the platforms, which are all very good, are going to basically be disrupting the client's business. And I remind people the platforms are the most dark arts of all. Marketers bid against each other to give away their margin to a platform that captures your data, has your customer. How do you build anything in the future like this? This is a boardroom discussion, and many CMOs need to take this to the boardroom, because if they can't handle it, take it to the boardroom. So as a result of that, you need partners. I believe there will be agencies. Now, obviously, it's not necessarily it'll be the current holding companies or the current agencies, but there will be new types of companies. I believe, for instance, many of the existing holding companies will succeed, right? I believe, for instance, Publicis will for sure. I'm pretty sure many of the others will. But then, you have new things, whether it's S4 or Me and Mr. Jones, or completely new kinds of initiatives. So I think this is amazingly positive, and the only thing we are lacking is positive, optimistic leadership that actually knows the stuff. That's the key thing I remind people. I said, even though I'm not in the business, the reason I started this newsletter, I wanted to learn about Substack. I just then built, a little media company because I wanted to learn something over 6 months. But my whole stuff is, if you aren't learning, you are dying. If you aren't doing, you're basically going to do, what? Buzzword bingo. You're going to talk about platforms and disruption and data lakes. Show me some cool shit. Don't tell me how your colon works.
Rishad, I'm afraid we're all out of time, and there
Perfect.
are cockroaches in the audience to move on to some other sessions. But it's a shame because that could have gone on all day. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for your time.
Absolutely.